for a 20-minute neighbourhood. Next slide, please. On the edge of the city of Edinburgh, in Scotland's capital city, a city of about 500,000 inhabitants, and this will add about another 20,000 to the population. So it's a really fascinating challenge for us. We do a range of work from city strategies to public realm and everything in between. And it's the spaces in between, I think, that makes this project particularly interesting. Next slide. But the starting point is that we're dealing with green fields, which have a tram track running through the centre of it. It's part of Edinburgh's recently installed tram system, which is it's a route at the moment. It's on its way to becoming a network. Next slide, please. But this site is very fortunate to have the tram running right through it, which connects the city out to the Edinburgh airport and the edge of the city. And the particularly interesting thing for us about this project, next slide, please, Nama, is how do you make a place? How do you make a new town effectively from nothing when there's virtually nothing there? There's green fields, or not so green in this image, and there's a road and a tram track. So we've established a set of principles to guide the master plan, because the master plan is very much a framework. It's a framework for placemaking, and it's a framework for development. And fundamentally, it's about cultivating, preparing the ground to cultivate this new place and making it a great place for people to live, but also to do everything else that nourishes them through life. And that's one of the key principles of the 20-minute neighbourhood. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk you through the principles which are guiding the master plan, which are really all of the aspects we think that kind of make it special and guide future detailed design for the delivery of the new neighbourhood. And the overriding principle is the one of the 20-minute neighbourhood. The diagram on the left here had its origins in the city of Melbourne, who pioneered thinking about 20-minute neighbourhoods. And the principle is very simple, that everything that you may need for regular daily life is within a 20-minute walk of where you live. So it's where you go to school, where you would go to work, where you would go to the shops, where you would meet your friends and play sport and do everything else. It's a place that's designed around people and a place that's designed around walking and cycling. Cars still have a role, but they're really third in line after people and cyclists and public transport. So next slide, please. So key principle is that it's well connected. So it's all very well being a new neighbourhood that you can walk and cycle around freely, but key question is, how does it connect into other neighbourhoods? So just because you live in a 20-minute neighbourhood doesn't mean that you live your life within a 20-minute radius. It means that everything for daily life is there, but it's critically important that you can, it's connected to other places and you don't just drive to and from it. So a guiding principle is that it's well connected by public transport and by cycle routes, and you can readily walk to the neighbouring neighbourhood as well. So the connection strategy is a series, is in a way, there's a kind of hierarchy to it. If you go to the next slide, please. And active travel and public transport are first. Active travel being primary, public transport being secondary, and cars being tertiary. And a rule with this is that those that are walking and cycling get the most direct route, then followed by public transport, and cars take the long way around. So it's making it easier to move around by walking or cycling. To encourage people to walk and cycle, it should be the easiest and quickest way to get around, followed by public transport. And that's a very important principle with the overall approach here. Next slide, please. So walkability is fundamental. It's not just about a connected network of routes. It's also designing the kind of places that encourage people to walk and cycle around the neighbourhood and feel safe, and to be able to do that quickly and enjoyably, but also that the spaces streets and spaces that you walk through are pleasant, pleasurable places, and it's a joy to walk around this neighbourhood. Next slide, please. And we've got a series of guiding scenarios that we've used here, and this is my favourite one, which was, can we design the streets in a way that you would feel happy for your 7-year-old child to cycle to school in the morning if they lived on the other side of the neighbourhood? I think it's a real test for this, and we come up a range of these anecdotal scenarios to really test what it's like living here. And we use this particular one when we're designing the network of streets and spaces. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So what this diagram is showing is, this is showing the fundamental public space network within the neighbourhood. And there's a hierarchy within it. And the colours indicate spaces which are primarily vehicle routes, which get you in and out of the neighbourhood, but which are limited. Those where people in cars share spaces, and those where pedestrians and cyclists have priority. And we've developed this network according to the previous scenario principle about how do I feel happy about my child to cycle to school on their own. So you can navigate the whole neighbourhood and navigate and access all of the key civic uses and activities, such as schools, the main shopping area, sports area, the parks and recreation area, that you can navigate your way around the whole neighbourhood without really coming into too much contact with cars if you wish. We're not banning cars. This is not pedestrian, completely pedestrianised area. Cars still have a very important role in many people's lives. Edinburgh is in a process of, in a way, transitioning away from the level of car use here. It's a difficult process to go through for everybody who lives here, because no matter what your views about how cities should be, there are times when you just need to use a car. And this new neighbourhood is designed around accommodating the car, but it doesn't dominate the spaces. I think that's the key message here. It's a kind of mixed space, but pedestrians and cyclists have priority. Next slide, please. And the streets and spaces are designed for that, but also we recognise that cars do have a place. So we have what we call mobility hubs embedded with the plan. These are effectively multi-storey car parks, but a different kind of multi-storey car park, and they're integrated with a range of mobility options, so that the ground floor has bike hire, cycle charging, cargo bike hire. There's Car Club, which is you can just rent cars by the hour. And there are two of these within the neighbourhood, and they're quite close to the entry points to the neighbourhood. So if you can't readily park your car at your home, so you go and park your car on the mobility hub, and then you walk to your home. A number of Dutch cities have pioneered this approach, and the Noordhaven district in Copenhagen's also implemented this approach, which works extremely well. It's part of the process of a sea change in attitudes and about controlling car use, but at the same time making it easy to make other choices. I think it's a definite balance between carrots and sticks here. How do you make it easy? And I think if you look at Copenhagen as a city, it's taken 20, 30 years to move away from the car. And the thing that's really swung it is not necessarily imposing controls. It's more about the fact that it's now the easiest, quickest way to navigate the city. So next slide, please. Sustainability is embedded in the plan, and I'm not going to really talk about energy because that's just what everybody does now. It's what you have to do. But I think what's important about the moves here is that a sustainable lifestyle is embedded in the whole approach to the new neighbourhood, from how it's connected by public transport and the tram, how people move around it, how people are not reliant on vehicles. And living in a very compact way is fundamentally more efficient. Of course, there's a whole range of energy measures to from how the homes are designed to work on the principle of fabric first, how all the energy is generated by renewables. But I think from a master planning perspective, I think it's the interesting thing is how you start from a principle. How do you make a place fundamentally more sustainable about designing it around how people move around and live their lives, and to make it easier to live a sustainable life. Next slide, please. This is the size this neighbourhood is. It is essentially a town, and it does have a designated centre. Which is clustered around the tram stop in the centre of town. In a way, we're trying to cultivate almost an accelerated growth of a settlement. If this was a small to medium-sized town in Scotland, it would have taken hundreds of years to develop to this kind of size, but this has been done in an accelerated way. In a way, you're kind of replicating the way a town has evolved from the original centre, where there may have been gathered around a key junction or a node in the countryside, or a particular feature, or being by a river or whatever. But here it's a tram stop. People will generally arrive and leave this place from the tram stop. So that's where the absolute centre of it is. So this is how the development is phased. It will be clustered around the initial tram stop and then grow out from that. Next slide, please. So there's been a lot of focus on how this tram space is designed, and also the softer elements of placemaking and urban design, how you cultivate and encourage retailers and other activities to come in and colonize these places, and getting this balance right between the retailers need footfall to bring customers, but equally you need the right kind of retailers to encourage the footfall in the first place. So there's, in parallel with the spatial planning, there's a series of initiatives underway to work out how to cultivate uses and activities which will encourage people to come and live here, but also to come to this place from other parts of the city to bring trade and custom, and to kind of begin to develop the softer elements of placemaking and city making. Next slide, please. So one of the guiding principles of any 20-minute neighbourhood is it's fundamentally a mixed-use place. So as well as homes, you have places to work, you have retail, you have education, and a range of what I call kind of civic infrastructure, which is the doctors and the dentists and the nurseries and all of these things which help to kind of support a community. So we've been working very closely with the local authority here to work out not just the private sector commercial activities such as the retail and the offices, but the civic activities which the local authority will have a role in providing. Next slide, please. So of course we can't be entirely prescriptive about what goes where, and we can't be precise about, well, there's going to be a doctor's surgery there by 2026 and there's going to be a dentist in the next street by 2027. But it's a case of providing enough of a framework and providing the right kind of accommodation. And generally speaking, these activities are in the ground floors of the buildings, so they're very easily accessible. They're provided you active frontage to these spaces. But we're setting that framework within the way we're approaching the master plan, but also how we're setting up the design guidance for the buildings. So generally speaking, the central area of the neighbourhood has inherently flexible ground floor space, which can accommodate a whole range of different uses, which can offer flexibility from day one, but also flex and adapt and change over time as any city would. Next slide. This is on the edge of the city, and you'll see from the earlier aerial photographs, it's quite green in character. A key part of the approach to this neighbourhood is it feels like a green place. Yes, there are designated parks and recreation areas, but every aspect of it feels green in character. So it's, as well as providing essential homes for people, and Edinburgh does have an acute issue with, there is a shortage of affordable homes within the city, that is fundamentally a pleasant place to walk around as well, and a place where the streets are designed that the cyclists and pedestrians feel safe and comfortable. And in a way, a real test of this, and this is back to the scenario testing I was talking about earlier, that children feel comfortable playing in the streets because there are much less cars around. It feels safe. It's a pleasant place to be. So the weaving of the green landscape throughout the whole master plan is another key feature of the overall approach to West Town. Next bit, please. So as well as having the landscape being integrated with the whole master plan, this is woven into the approach to the streets and spaces as well. Next slide, please. And running right through the center of the master plan, there's it's a rather dry title at the moment. It's called the Linear Park, but it's a linear green space, which is a key circulation space within the new neighbourhood. And when I talked about how you get to school, where you would cycle across this park or up and down the park and then use that to navigate your way through the neighbourhood. But we're having a debate with the City Council at the moment about how big it should be. And I think our approach to it is, it's an important recreation space for the city. You should feel safe walking across it. There's some parks in the city where many people feel unsafe at night because it's such an expansive space. It's, I suppose, a Central Park, New York kind of situation. But here we felt it was important that this was a very accessible green space. People would possibly use it. At times it would be very busy, but in a way that's quite a good thing. But there's natural surveillance on either side of the park, so people feel safe to use it, so it doesn't become a dark void at night. Next slide, please. Because as well as the designated parks, we're trying to design a place which is like a regular neighbourhood. You might have a designated park space, but also the way that many younger people would approach it is actually they don't want to be in the place which is the designated place. They want to hang out in places which are exciting and interesting and perhaps hidden away in some places. So we try to design the whole neighbourhood that it's a place where there's a whole range of different experiences for a whole range of ages in the population. Next slide, please. And the streets themselves are key play spaces. As I said, they're designed in a way that it's a place you can feel safe allowing your kids to play in the street here. And that applies to the whole neighbourhood. It comes back to the thing about how do you feel safe about your kids cycling to school? How do you feel safe letting them run around in the streets and just hang out and play and enjoy childhood in this place? Next slide, please. So this plan maps out the range of different spaces. So as well as designated recreation space, we've got a whole range of different green spaces, including the courtyard spaces within the block structure of the plan. Now I haven't talked about it yet, but it follows in a way, a sort of tried and tested perimeter block format. Edinburgh is a city which has what are called tenement blocks, which are 4 to 5 story perimeter blocks with green space in the centre. Most people in Edinburgh live in these type of homes, and in a way, Edinburgh is quite. It's more similar to some Northern European cities. This apartment block form is very, very common here. So this plan develops that typology, but within that introduces a range of variety of spaces and forms and street spaces. Next slide, please. I mentioned that Edinburgh is an affordability issue, and an acute area is actually in common with other European cities. London in particular, Copenhagen's got an acute issue with this. Is a range of different homes and tenures. So we have, as well as private housing, there will be what's called mid-market rent, and which is subsidised, and also social rented housing. We also have a policy in the city, evolving policy in the city, where the amount of what's termed affordable homes is at 35% of the overall number of homes here. So a social mix within the new neighbourhood is a kind of key part of what's going to make it an authentic place in the future. Next slide. So a variety of tenures, variety of townscape, although the basic module is the perimeter block and the Edinburgh tenement form. We've introduced a variety of scales and forms within that. There's a microclimate dimension to this. So essentially, the perimeter block forms are generally open-sided on the south, or have lower buildings on the south, so it brings daylight into the garden spaces and sunlight into the main living spaces. So the master plan is designed to have inherent variety within it, and as well as the design guidance material within this document, there's a series of parameters plans which define those quite specifically. Next slide, please. I'll zip through the rest of this because I'm conscious you've been very patient this afternoon. So it's about varied tenures, varied townscape, and also a varied roofscape as well, to give the different spaces distinct characters. Next slide, please. And creating a new neighbourhood from scratch in a relatively accelerated period, the softer dimensions I talked about are critically important. How do you create a sense of place from the field I showed at the beginning with the tram running through it? How does it go from that to this in a space of 4 to 5 years? So the cultivating the uses and the various social and civic activities that form part of the neighbourhood. When there isn't a community there at the moment, we can't go and consult with the community and engage with the community at the moment, which is why we introduced the scenarios I talked about to, in a way, kind of humanize the spatial planning and delve into the softer side of placemaking. Next slide, please. So this sheet is titled Master Plan, but I think I keep going back to West Town being a placemaking and development framework. We're going through the planning process at the moment, and this plan is referred to as the illustrative plan, which means we're not looking to get consent for a plan that looks precisely like this. This is an indication of how all the guidance work we're doing, which really is the essence of the framework, the parameters plans and the specific design guidance, how that could be realized, but it goes back to the fundamental guidance, because we're cultivating a place here over a significant number of years. Things will flex and change, but the principles I've just outlined are in a way are on the tablets of stone. Really, they are the fundamental principles which guide the detailed design and the delivery of this new place. And below that, if you just flick through the rest of these now quite quickly, we've got guidance on the character areas, specific guidance on spaces within that, the dimensions of how those spaces are set out, how that space should look and feel. But ultimately, this aerial image here is very much an illustration of what it should be. It's not a precise fixed plan, or it's not big architecture, as my urban design tutors used to call it. It's very much approach to urban design, which has a time dimension to it. And it's about how, as urban designers, you're really preparing the ground, how you're cultivating the land for the future, rather than prescribing precisely how it should be, because you'll never have that control over that length of time. But in a way, it's kind of more interesting. And I would argue that if you take the cultivation approach, you actually end up creating a much more authentic place at the end of the day. So thank you again, all of you, for your patience. For those who are still around, apologies for the, I think we were both beyond technical hitches earlier, but
technical challenges are fun. Okay, for the Q&A, I would like to introduce Ella Levine. So for those of you who don't know, this Master Planning for Growth webinar series is a part of a project that we work together with School of Cities at the University of Toronto with a group of students from different disciplines. So Ella Levine is a student for political science and sociology, and Ella will manage or run or lead the Q&A portion of this webinar. So Ella, please take it from here.
Thank you very much, Naama, and thank you, Mr. Anderson, as well, for that great presentation. I very much enjoyed it. As Naama said, I'm not an urban planning student, so this is a very fun sort of look into your world. I see that we already have some questions lined up, so I think I will jump right into those if you're ready. So I saw one that was asking about the general challenges of the 20-minute neighborhood. So this person is asking, what are some of the most common challenges that you have run into while planning this neighborhood?
The common challenges are, if you set out design streets and spaces for people and bikes, how do you deal with all of the city authorities, transport people who, I'm not criticizing them, but they have guidance on how things should be and how streets should be designed for refuse trucks and for a whole range of other vehicles. And you look at cities particularly in Northern Europe, which have very narrow streets and spaces, and they are fantastic places, but you would never create them from city road guidance. And Edinburgh is actually a very good example of that. Edinburgh is a medieval centre to it. And in the city's design guidance, you have images of all these streets and spaces, which could never actually be delivered according to the guidance within the document. So I think if you're trying to do something that is taking things in a different direction at this scale, I think there's a really there's a very significant advocacy dimension to this. How do you argue the case for doing things differently when it's a big scale initiative of this nature, and you hit a kind of embedded caution about doing things differently? So what we've been asked to evidence everything. So we've had to gather a lot of precedent, a lot of benchmarks from around the world, particularly Northern Europe, to make the case for what we're doing.
Very interesting. And I see that actually kind of relates to another question here. Someone has asked, how do you accommodate emergency and delivery services? Because I assume when you're planning a sort of dense neighborhood like this, where you're not car-centric, you still have to accommodate for fire trucks, emergency.
Absolutely, yes, we do. And the streets and spaces, although I didn't get into the detail here, they are designed to accommodate them. It doesn't mean they can they can kind of freely charge around. Everywhere is accessible, and we've had to check all the turning circles and all that kind of thing. And yeah, some of it is a bit tight, but certainly emergency vehicles and delivery vehicles can access the whole thing. But part of the thinking with the mobility hubs I talked about is that will be centralized last mile delivery. So you go and pick up your Amazon parcel in a locker at the mobility hub on your way home.
Very interesting. There's lots of questions about the mobility hubs and the parking strategies. So I'll try to sort of compound them into one. But generally, they're asking how exactly would it work on a day-to-day basis? So especially for the residential demand, would there be underground parking as well? Or would it just be in this mobility hub structure?
It's just in the mobility hub structure. Underground parking generally isn't deliverable, or it's not viable unless it's a very high value city center area. Certainly a peripheral area like this, it wouldn't be viable. And there's also as the engineers we're working with keep reminding me, the embodied carbon cost of doing an underground, digging a big hole and filling it with concrete is significantly more than doing the multi-story. But I think the interesting thing about the multi-story, and it's worth having a look at the ones in Nordhavn in Copenhagen, which is the Kobe master plan. I'm quite open to admit that we were, very strongly influenced by it. It's got a kids' playground on the roof, and it's got a step track up and down it. It's got recycling within it and an energy center within it. So the idea that there's these centralized civic resources within the neighborhood, I think is really quite interesting. But there's no question that there's a behavior change dimension to not being able to park your car outside the front door of your home and to park it 5 minutes away. I think it comes back to making it easy to make more sustainable choices.
And I assume that includes...
There's a carrot, like I just call it a carrot and a gentle stick rather than a hard stick.
Right. And I assume the sustainable choices also includes the transition to using bikes instead of cars.
Yes, absolutely, yes.
And someone has asked if you mentioned that there would be bikes for hire in those mobility hubs.
Yes, there would be, yes. There'd be bikes for hire, also electric bikes for hire and charging for electric bikes as well. It's pretty flat out at West Town, but Edinburgh city centre, it's got quite challenging topography, and unless you're pretty fit, it's quite a hard city to cycle around in.
And
so electric bikes are kind of really important here.
And so I assume that also means that throughout the plan, there would be, they're called, share docks set up around the plan?
Yeah, that's the idea. I mean, the Edinburgh has quite onerous bike parking requirements. So planning it essentially works out 200%. So there's 2 bikes per dwelling, which is quite a lot of bikes. If you're doing a perimeter block with a couple of hundred homes in them. So there's no shortage of bike space, but yes, the kind of docking stations is part of the evolving plan as well.
Ella, because it's already noon here, let's wrap up with one last question.
Okay.
Sure. I won't hit you with anything too tough, but this is an interesting question that I saw about the exact density of the area. As you said, it is an organic plan, so you're kind of expecting things to change as you go along. But what do you think the final finished level of density would be?
Expressed in what way? In what measure?
This person hasn't necessarily clarified, but however you would
Okay,
like to.
it's 7,000 homes overall. It works out at about 150 dwellings per hectare, and I really apologize, I can't convert that to acres. That's the kind of local measure here, dwellings per hectare. So it's dense, but it's not super dense. I think we've looked at benchmarks in different parts of the city, and it's kind of interesting that there's an area in the city called Leith Walk, which is one of the densest areas in the cities in the city, because there's not much green space and there's a lot of these perimeter blocks. But there is also the highest concentration of independent retailers in the city as well. It's a really interesting part of the city. And I would argue that you need density to make public transport viable and to make interesting, varied, diverse retail and activities viable as well. And I think it's an interesting balance, but I would argue that you need density in cities to make cities good spaces, good places, if it's designed in the right way. That's my caveat to that.
Thank you very much.
And with that, thank you, Ella, and thank you, Owen, and thank you everyone else for your patience. And I apologize, I will send the recording again to everyone who registered. And from Toronto to you over there in Scotland, thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Thank you very much.